This is Outdoor Life and Liberty. Welcome to the channel. My name is Michael. I am your host. Thank you for joining us. If you haven't followed us yet, please take a moment and click on the follow button. It'll certainly help us get this launched properly. And we want to hit the ground running here. So today is November 18th, 2024. This is episode 7. Welcome. So we'll start with a little bit of news, as is our format. We've had some comments and some suggestions in the email box about the format. We may be tweaking it a little bit. So if you like it, don't like it, have some suggestions, please be sure to email us, and we get all those emails on a daily basis. But for now, we'll move forward with this. So with a little bit of news to start off with, it says. I believe this one was not from Axios. This one, I believe, was from Newsmax. The Biden administration is trying to cause World War III by authorizing Ukraine to use U.S. supplied missiles to strike deeper inside Russia, Donald Trump Jr. said. The military industrial complex seems to want to make sure they get World War III going before my father has a chance to create peace and save lives, Trump Jr. posted on X. Quote, gotta lock in those trillions of dollars, life be damned. Imbeciles, unquote. Biden's decision allowing Kiev to use the Army Tactical Missile System, or ATACMs, for attacks further inside Russia comes as Russian President Vladimir Putin positions North Korean troops along Ukraine's northern border to try to reclaim hundreds of square miles of territory seized by Ukrainian forces. Biden's move also follows the presidential election victory of Donald Trump, who has said he would bring about a swift end to the war and raised uncertainty about whether his administration would continue the United States military support for Ukraine. Putin has warned that Moscow could provide long-range weapons to others to strike Western targets if NATO allies allow Ukraine to use their arms to attack Russian territory. So that is a pretty ominous change here going on, and I'm not really clear. I know what they're saying. They're trying to, Biden administration may be like trying to give the Trump administration a black eye, but that truly is playing with fire there. That is a World War III scenario. By escalating this is something I would have supported at the very beginning of the conflict. When Russia first started invading Ukraine, I would not have had a problem with authorizing these weapons and their use because it would have had a deterrent effect and probably been fairly effective. However, at this juncture, the war is years underway. Many thousands and thousands of lives lost, territory taken, lost, and regained at the cost of blood for both sides. And at this point, with a new administration coming in who has clearly stated their objective is to probably decrease our military involvement with Ukraine and to try to promote peace between Ukraine and Russia, seems a very odd and calculated move to kind of cause problems for the Trump administration coming in. If you can imagine starting your presidency at the outbreak of World War III, that's kind of a scenario that's a possibility. I'm not saying likely, but it certainly is a possibility. So I'm not exactly sure what's in play there. I don't think it's a wise decision. But then again, many things the Biden-Harris administration does, I do not deem to be wise. Moving on, the issues arising from thousands of illegal immigrants pouring into Chicago from around the world have united many in the city's Black and Hispanic communities who blame the government for the resultant social problems, including an increase in crime. Local citizens say their neighborhoods are less safe, their schools are overcrowded, already scarce jobs are now even harder to come by, and the distribution of municipal resources favors illegal immigrants. Quote, my beef is with the government, not with the migrants, unquote, said Hector, a Hispanic pastor from Brighton Park on the city's south side. He continues, there are a lot of injustices. We do not see equality. The migrants are given everything. The money is coming out of our pockets, unquote. The city has provided housing for new arrivals, ranging from large tents and warehouses to hotels scattered throughout the city and in some suburbs. Uh, Chaplain Antonio, who ministers to immigrants, has observed criminal gang colors, signs, and emblems among them as he greets the newcomers uh, on their arrival in their city of Chicago. Quote, we're not against legitimate immigration, but this problem should have been stopped at the border, unquote, he said. Antonio also said that the government is favoring the new non citizen immigrants over the people who are already here legally and are citizens. So this is, again, nothing new, but this is now coming from Chicago, which is a very big sanctuary city in the middle of a very big sanctuary state. And the policies being enacted by the Democratic government of the city and state are harming their own citizens. They're treating migrants better than their own people. And this is a pattern that we see repeated everywhere that there is sanctuary cities. You don't have to look any further than the mayor of New York City, who now is saying, please, Trump, come in and do these programs and deport these people from our city because I can't handle them anymore. So it's an interesting situation whereby it's come full circle. And it's been obvious to those of us who employ uncommon sense that this wouldn't be the inevitable outcome. But of course, the Democrats and with their propaganda partners, the lamestream media, had convinced a large portion of the country, 48 or 49%, that, oh no, this was not the case. But they're now discovering that it actually is. Kind of like the comment, I just loved that on the interview where they had vice presidential, then candidate, uh, J.D. Vance, talking to a news anchor who said, well, it's not like the city's being invaded. They've only invaded and taken over a couple of apartment complexes. And Vance's response was he looked at her and said, do you hear yourself talking? That's kind of where all of us are. Uh, what's been going on since about 2008 with the entrance of the Obama administration and carrying through with the only pause in that agenda being the 2016 to 2020 when Trump was in office is a 100% organized attempt to undermine what America is and rebuild it into something that a minority of oligarchs and um, aristocrats within the Democratic Party and their socialist allies want it to be. And unfortunately, that's all coming home to roost now. So, not surprising that this is information coming out of the um, Windy City. And it's a shame. Chicago used to be a really nice city. I wouldn't go there now. So, we're not going to be too heavy on the news. We're going to try to make this a relatively shorter video, as many of our other shows have been stretching kind of long. What with all the information to cover from the presidential election and the political fallout from all that, and how that affects us and various things. But we are going to talk a little bit about the idea of firearms and Second Amendment rights and our government, because Trump is, if nothing, if not pro Second Amendment. The folks he is bringing in, I'm really waiting to see who he nominates as the director for the ATF. But that's got a lot of people's heads spinning who are pro gun safety, and I do this because that ultimately means funded by anti-gun lobbyists and anti-gun organizations. Have been running roughshod since Biden Harris came into power, which thank God is way out now. So, anyways, I thought, I hear a lot of people making arguments here and there, and they debate what the Constitution meant in the Second Amendment. They say the wording is kind of vague, but there's actually a lot of information out there, and you can even Google it and find it, talking about like the first draft and the second draft and then the final draft of the Constitution, and look at some of the states' constitutions drafts and ultimately where they ended up. And you'll see that their position is pretty clear. Also, there are a number of publications like the Federalist Papers. Another good one is the Federal Farmer. These were all 18th century publications written largely by the people who were the founding fathers and wrote the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. And so no one would be more qualified to talk about what that meant than them. So we're going to take a look at a couple of things to try to debase some really bad misinformation being floated out there, mostly on the mainstream media and occasionally even on the more centrist and more right-leaning media. Fox occasionally gets this wrong as an example in an opinion piece, and it's just not a matter of, I think, at least in the case of Fox, being blatantly misguiding, misleading. I think it's just a matter of ignorance that a lot of people don't understand firearms laws, the history of firearms in this country, and the history of our country in general, which is really not being taught too much anymore in our schools. So what I thought is I would use just a couple of quotes. We're not going to stay on this too long, but I want you to think about a couple of things here. And two of these three people are people I'm very big fans of, including my favorite founding father and patriot, which is Patrick Henry. So we'll start with his quote, and we'll just start. I won't keep saying quote, but his quote is as follows: "Are we at last brought to such a humiliating and debasing degradation that we cannot be trusted with arms for our own defense? Where is the difference between having our arms in our possession and under our own direction and them under the management of Congress? If our defense is to be the real object of having those arms, in whose hands can they be trusted with more propriety or equal safety to us, as in our own hands?" That's a great question, Mr. Henry. He was a pretty smart guy. And that's the point, is that if the whole purpose of Second Amendment is to provide for our safety and our well-being and safeguard our liberties against tyranny, with whom can we trust those firearms to more than ourselves, the people who are understand what our wants and safety needs are? So, very good point. We'll move on to one now from Mr. Noah Webster. I heard of his name before. He says, quote, "Before a standing army can rule, the people must be disarmed, as they are in almost every kingdom of Europe. The supreme power in America cannot enforce unjust laws by the sword because the whole body of the people are armed and can constitute a force superior to any band of regular troops that can be, on any pretense, raised in the United States," unquote. So, in other words, you need to understand the Second Amendment was not enshrining sporting weapons rights, and it was not enshrining hunting rights. The purpose behind it, when you listen to the founding fathers, read the Federalist Papers, read what they're saying in their own newspapers, and what the first and early draft versions of the Constitution and Bill of Rights actually are, and is quite revealing that what they are plainly saying is that the people should be able to bear arms and have arms, what is unwritten but completely understood, arms comparable to that which the standing armies would be able to field. Because again, if the object is to prevent those armies from perpetrating tyranny, then you would have to be able to contend with that army, which would mean, of course, that you would have to have a weapon equal to theirs to have any possible chance of contending with them. So there's no doubt what they're referring to is the population should be armed to protect us from threats of within and without, that it's the best safeguard for our liberties against tyranny, and that goes without saying by necessity. That means having arms that are on peer with what the military is currently using. There's no doubt about this. And the same applies to the First Amendment, because the people who try to say the Second Amendment only applies to the weapons that they had back then, like a flintlock musket, and not to modern weapons, then I would argue so your First Amendment rights only apply if you use a pen with iron gall ink and parchment to write on. If you use anything more modern than that, you don't have a First Amendment protection. And of course, that would be absurd. And it's just as absurd as this notion of the Second Amendment and what it applies to. It's literally um, a moot argument. It's clearly not their intention, nor the intention of the document itself. Now that brings me to, if you're familiar with the Second Amendment, another contention is um, that a well-organized militia being necessary for the security of the state, blah blah blah. And a lot of people don't understand that's a separate clause from the second part, which is the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. Um, those are separate clauses, but even be that as it may, I need to inform maybe perhaps some of my less educated critics and people out there who believe, well, there's the key. They're not talking about an independent ownership of firearms. They're talking about the militia. First off, there are several Supreme Court decisions, including the Heller decision, which clearly show that it's being interpreted as the individual's right to have firearms. And that's in contemporary. But let's go back, since the focus today is what the framers of the Constitution actually meant. And we'll talk to one of the founding fathers, what he wrote. Richard Harry Lee, in Federal Farmer number 18 on January 25th, 1788, wrote the following. And I need my friends who think that the arms should only be in the hands of the militia to listen to what this says very carefully. It says, quote, "A militia, when properly formed, are in fact the people themselves, and include, according to the past and general usage of the states, all men capable of bearing arms. To preserve liberty, it is essential that the whole body of the people always possess arms, and to be taught alike, especially when young, how to use them." Unquote. I'm going to call your attention to this, however, again. So it says, the militia is in fact the people themselves, and then the paraphrase, and what that means by common usage in the states are all men, and today we would include women, but all men capable of bearing arms. So, in other words, if you're capable of having a firearm, you are part of the militia that they're referring to. So, it literally means all citizens who can rightfully have firearms. And so, it still comes back to meaning pretty much everybody. And it's this inclusion here where you see men capable of bearing arms, where they even got the legal precedent to say, well, for instance, if you're convicted of certain felony crimes, for instance, we can restrict your access to firearm, is because of that term, all men capable of bearing arms. But unless you have one of those disqualifying conditions, in other words, unless you're a convicted felon or a foreign person not born here and has not properly immigrated, accepting those people, all people have the right to bear arms because all people are considered the militia. So let's lay that to rest right now. This argument that the militia means some sort of like organized official body is not true. As it was understood when written, what they were basically saying is, since everybody who can have a gun is the militia, that militia being well organized is the best safety that we have. And of course, every person, therefore, has a right to bear arms and that not be infringed because they're all part of the militia. So hopefully that helps clarify some of the sticky points that some people get into when they talk about the Second Amendment, and what it clearly it means and what it's been interpreted of late to mean. So that's that little bit of information. We're going to talk now a little bit in my section. If you've watched the previous episodes called Uncommon Sense. And we're going to follow the theme of what we just spoke about a little bit. I mentioned in our survival episode about firearms and selecting firearms and uses of firearms that I get questioned a lot about why I am constantly carrying a pistol or revolver, some sort of sidearm, on everywhere I go, 24/7, pretty much anywhere that I'm legally allowed to have it. And fortunately, here in Ohio, we have constitutional carry, and it's legal just about everywhere. And the same where my other location I am based out of, which is in Virginia, likewise has some pretty good firearms laws. But the reason that I do have a concealed carry permit and do carry all the time, 100%, is because of some facts that we need to discuss just very briefly. So, I have mentioned, if you've watched earlier videos, that in a prior career, I did work in law enforcement for a number of years. And if you look at the statistics even today, looking at the 2023 Unified Crime Report, for example, it takes law enforcement in this country on average 11 to 14 minutes to respond to an incident. Now, I want you to think about how long that is. If you're sitting in your living room and some two people or three or one, but more and more it's multiple people, say two, kick in your front door and shoot you because they're going to rob your house. How long did that take? 10 seconds, 5 seconds, 30 seconds, but it's certainly far, far shorter amount of time than 11 to 14 minutes. But assuming that they shot you in the chest and somebody upstairs, your spouse, a loved one, a neighbor, hears that and dials 911, somewhere between 11 and 14 minutes later, in will roll a squad car. By then, you're dead and your house has been robbed or whatever's happened, and the bad guys are long gone. Now, our law enforcement sisters and brothers are very good at solving murders and rapes and the like, but they're not very good at preventing them. They can't be everywhere all the time. So I guess my question would be, do you feel better knowing, as you're laying in your living room floor, bleeding out from a gunshot wound to your chest, that they will likely catch the perpetrators? Or would you feel maybe a little bit better knowing that as they kicked in the door to your house, you produced your lawfully owned and, lawfully possessed sidearm or long gun if it's next to your couch, and you neutralized the threat before they could finish pointing the gun at you and get a shot off? And yep, you're going to have to go through some legal procedures. The police are going to come. You're going to be questioned. You're probably going to be taken to the station and detained. But if it was a clean and legal shoot, um, probably not prosecuted, and you go about your life. Now, there's tragic things involved with that. Psychologically, you're going to take a beating. Financially, defending yourself, if it goes further than that, and you have one of those prosecutors who's a Soros funded prosecutor, you're going to have to defend your case. It's going to get expensive. People I know who have been involved with civilian shootings like that have found that they've had friends that they've lost because it's such an emotional subject to some. But again, I ask you, so being able to come home later that night and be with your wife and or children and or other loved ones versus being in a morgue on a slab awaiting your autopsy, I would submit that I would much rather not allow those great skills that they have of solving my murder come into play, and let the justice system correctly see that I defended myself following the letter of the law, and I'm alive, even if it costs me some money and heartache. Um, so I'd rather stop them from killing me in the first place, in other words. And I want you to think about that because that does involve some common sense. If you're going to decide to arm yourself and train to defend yourself, there are consequences, both psychologically and in real world, financially, could affect your job, could affect your relationships, could affect a lot of things. So The worst case scenario would be to get a firearm, but be unsure that you're able to follow through. Are you able to stop that person from killing you? Or do you have it in you to take that person's life so that you and your family's lives are spared? And for many of us, the answer is yes. For a lot of people, they might not know. And for some people, the answer is no. They don't want to, they would never do that under any circumstance. I would submit that if you're not willing to do that, still have a gun available to get food in a survival situation, but I wouldn't be packing heat on me. I wouldn't have a pistol on my hip like I continuously do, because then if you're killed, you're just giving a weapon to already a bad guy who just came in and killed you, took your gun, went about their way because there was no way you intended to use it. Probably best that you know yourself that well. Ask those tough questions, talk it over with your family, and come to a conclusion. But many of us, as the adage goes, I'd really rather be tried by 12 than carried by six. So for some of us, the answer is pretty blatant. But just a little thing to think about in our uncommon sense: 11, 14 minutes response time, the national average. A school shooting, for example, where they come in, shoot up a dozen kids, and then usually kill themselves on average, or 2.5 minutes, 2 to 2.5 minutes from start to finish. Sometimes extending as long as 5. But if there's not a school resource officer there who's armed, they're not going to come there in time to stop anything. They're going to come there and probably solve the crime. But, that's going to be small consolation to people who are burying loved ones. So we're going to cover now our little, and then I've got some news at the end. We normally end with our humor. Again, is this one from Babylon Bee? This one is from Babylon Bee again. I love those guys. And we're going to cover a little bit of humorous news here. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's coming up in our episode 8. That would be coming up in the future. Oh, and I did get, before I go there, I'm getting ahead of myself. I did get an email question. If you look behind me here, you'll see that some of my firearms are here in the room. Most of them are in gun safes, but this is a safe room. The door is a safe, so you really can't get in here. So it is a gun safe. But some of these guns I have just sitting out. Sometimes because I just don't have room. I've got 3 very large gun safes and they're packed full. And sometimes because these are the guns that, if I come in the safe room, I can grab and head out the door if I need it for something. But somebody called their attention to the second one here. I hope I'm pointing all right. Asking about that because the bolt is strange. So that's a great question. That firearm is one of my favorites. It's a K31 Swiss firearm. It was, as the name stands, the K is for carabiner, or it's a little shorter than a traditional long rifle in their family of rifles. And it was established as a model that they're going to use in their military in 1931, hence K31. A lot of people mistakenly call it a Schmidt-Rubin. The Schmidt-Rubin is the bolt action, the guy who designed, because it's a straight pull back and push forward. Normally on a gun, you have to flip it up, pull the bolt back, push it forward, flip that down. On this, there's a little T handle. You pull it straight back, push it straight forward. So it's very simple, easy to be used with gloved hands, and it gets pretty cold there during a lot of the years up in the Alps. And Schmidt-Rubin designed the 1898 model of a rifle that they were using and invented this push-pull system. But he had nothing to do with the formulation, though, and the innovation and development and design of this particular rifle. He had been dead for long before 1931. So this was designed using a principle that he had perfected of the push-pull bolt, but it is not a Schmidt-Rubin carbine, the K31. Its claim to fame is a really accurate. It's got an iron sight that goes out to 1,500 meters. And I have been on range in Quantico, Virginia, where they have very, very long range. They use it for FBI training and Marine Corps. It's Marine Base Quantico, Marine Corps sniper training, and that sort of thing. And I saw a guy shooting, and he came over and said, "Oh, can I look at your K31? And did I have the original ammunition, which is called GP11? I do. That is what I shoot in it typically." And I was shooting at, I think, 400 yards. and really having some trouble because with my eyesight at my age, I do much better with an optic. But as a purist, that gun, has a diopter sight, and there's optics you can clamp to it. But I'm using it straight iron sights, and so I wasn't having the best range day of my life at 400 yards of iron sights. But this guy came along and actually went back to the lane he was shooting at, and that was the 1 mile range, and popped that sight up and fired a shot and looked at his camera, which shows where your hits are hitting, and saw where the bullet hit, made a slight adjustment, and on the second shot, you heard the ding of the metal target getting hit, and and I was just amazed. So that's kind of great. It's kind of bad because I can't blame the rifle when I miss and say, "Dang, this rifle must be off." So, but good question. That is a K-31. It's a World War II vintage rifle, 6 round magazine, detachable, so you could reload it quickly. Big switches, that big T bolt handle on the side, so it's easy to manipulate with gloved hands up in the Alps where it gets really cold part times of the year. Um, and interestingly, one of the reasons Hitler never really invaded them a lot was if you look through his writings, as he said, gosh, those darn Swiss, they kind of like Israel today. They have mandatory military compulsory service. And when you're in the military, every male who was issued a K-31. And then after they finished their service, if they finished their time honorably, they were given the option to keep the K-31s as personal weapons, which is how so many of them got out in the market today. You used to be able to buy them for a couple of $100, and that's before everybody caught on just how accurate these things are. They're machined throughout. There's no stamp parts, no meme parts. Really exquisite trigger. You have to get to a very high-end rifle today to get a trigger that would beat the two-stage trigger that comes with. It's just beautiful trigger and highly accurate, more accurate than somebody like me. So really interesting gun, and yeah, that's what Hitler was like. All these young men, they're in their home territory up in the mountains. They're trained to be very good shots. They have these rifles with them. They would be coming out of the woodwork and just decimate us. So it was a wise choice. Never invaded. That's one of the motives behind that. So that's an interesting question. Thank you, and then keep those coming if you want questions or the comments we talked about. The address is outdoorlifeandliberty at gmail.com. That's outdoorlifeandliberty at gmail.com. Also, our website will be up and running soon, as will our editing technology. So our videos here going forward, probably starting around episode 10, will have a much slicker look. It had a bigger learning curve than I anticipated, and a tech whiz I am not. All right, moving on to the Babylon Bee for a little fun. This in from Washington, D.C. Having failed to stop him thus far, Democrats have implemented their last-ditch attempt to prevent Donald Trump from taking office by starting World War III. While all efforts to indict Trump, remove him from state ballots, imprison him, and assassinate him were unable to keep him from winning a landslide victory earlier this month in the presidential election, Democratic Party leaders were hopeful that their emergency plan of plunging the globe into nuclear conflict and a subsequent post-apocalyptic hellscape should do the trick. Quote, "We hoped it wouldn't come to this, but we've got to do what's necessary," unquote, said one source within the Biden White House. Continuing, "We tried every other plan to keep Trump from regaining power, but he still got reelected. Now, in order to save America and democracy itself, we have no choice but to resort to our scorched earth plan." Literally, scorched earth. Top Democrats were confident that they would go down in history as heroes who prevented Trump from destroying the world by preemptively destroying the world to keep him from taking office. Quote, "Nothing preserves freedom like a good old-fashioned world war," unquote, the source says. "You can't be president of the United States if there is no United States to be president of. Checkmate, Trump," unquote. Unconfirmed reports circulated that Democrats had hidden California Governor Gavin Newsom away in an underground bunker so that he would be able to emerge as president of the smoldering, irradiated ash heap that was once the United States. At publishing time, mainstream media outlets were praising the Democratic efforts to save the world from Trump by destroying the world. I think I kind of opened with I guess I didn't tie those together. It would make me look really clever if I'd have thought about that. But my choice for humor was kind of matched what we talked about at the beginning. It is very scary what's going on right now in Ukraine and Russia. I'm going to tell you a little bit about next episode where we're going to do a gear review of a gun optic. This is going to be reviewing the Holosun TRS-TH. What that is it's a red dot sight that overlays thermal imaging. So you see both. You see the reticle, the red dot, and with the thermal turned off, it's just a standard red dot holographic sight. But with the thermal turned on, it overlays thermal imaging over that. So you're able to see things in complete darkness. We mentioned a little bit when we talked about the difference between thermal and night vision. Night vision does have some advantages. For instance, if you're trying to shoot in or out through a window, then night vision is going to be the way you want to go. But the beauty of thermal is night vision, especially in complete darkness, requires an IR illuminator. Now, in decades past, that's not a big issue because very few countries or people had night vision. Therefore, nobody was going to see the infrared illumination that it's projecting because it's invisible to the naked eye, and therefore was a really good idea. But more and more, what we're seeing is not only our hostile, belligerent countries that we might go to war against getting night vision equipment in large quantities, but it's so widely available to the public that many bad guys, even if you're talking home defense, now are employing night vision equipment. And so if you come out with your scope or a handheld scanner that's using an IR illuminator so you can see in total darkness, and they have night vision too, it's kind of like a bright shining flashlight that's going to let them aim very easily at you to eliminate you so they can go about their business. So the beauty of thermal is it's passive. It doesn't transmit anything. It just receives the spectrum of heat rather than the spectrum of light, and creates the image based on that. So unless you're looking in or out a pane of glass, as an example, it's able to show you things in 100% darkness. You can't see anything or the hand in front of your face, but the thermal imager is going to show you that intruder crouching below your couch. And in total darkness, you can take him out and he'll never know where it even came from because it's totally dark. Unless he turns on a flashlight, of course, which would be tactically really stupid. But then again, we said criminals aren't stupid, but you get my drift. So we had the option to review the TRS night vision NV or the TRS thermal TH, and we went with the thermal because it's a little higher tech. We want to kind of run it through its paces, and we'll be showing you what we like, what we don't like, and if we think it's a good piece of equipment for you to add to your staple. So the Holosun TRS TH thermal red dot scope will be on our next issue. So I hope that you've enjoyed this episode of our little channel here. Again, if you haven't already done so, please follow us and help spread the word. We're new, relatively just getting off the ground here, and the more followers and the help we can get, the better. So hopefully you'll look to do that. Otherwise, we're trying to put these out about once every 3 to 4 days ish. We're trying to be more aggressive than just once a week, and so far we've been able to maintain that, and that is our objective going forward. Also, again, at that outdoor life and liberty at gmail.com, if you have suggestions, people you'd like to see us interview, because on episode after the next one, which is episode 8, so episode 9, we will be having a guest we're going to interview for a few minutes. If you've got people in mind that you'd like to see us interview, if you have products you'd like to see us review, If you have an issue you'd like to see us discuss, let us know. And likewise, what you like about our style, what you don't like about the style, and what you would like to see changed, and what you want us to keep the same. It's all very helpful at this early stage in development here on our little project. So again, my name is Michael. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and we will see you next week on Outdoor Life and Liberty.